Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another informative edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Several interesting news stories to cover with you this week, including a Texas town where roughly 10% of the town's population is now unemployed. We're also going to be looking at the recent Syrian violence, as well as the United States government leaders not able to reach an agreement on the spending cuts. And lastly, Catan, we have the Pope making a statement about the Lord sleeping. We're going to look at that and discuss that story as well.
Interesting. But first, a disturbing health report on the abuse of prescription drugs. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says drug overdose deaths are up for the 11th consecutive year. Now, most of the fatalities involved are the addictive painkillers, such as, you probably heard of these, Oxycontin and Vicodin, which cause 3 out of the 4 of the deadly overdoses. Anti-anxiety drugs such as Valium were also behind many of the overdoses, and the report says most of the deaths were accidental. However, 17% of the medication-related deaths were suicides.
Now we're going to turn our focus over to YPN's Larry McGee, who has a two-part story on the dangerous effects of what some children are watching and a new report of a country that might be watching us. Larry, what's the scoop on these stories?
What are we watching and who is watching us? Those are the questions being answered this week, Jeff. And starting off, China is being accused of unleashing its full spy power on American power grids and the wealth of American manufacturing. The Chinese People's Liberation Army has over 2 million personnel, but it is the 1,000 or so located within a plain white high-rise in Shanghai, which has the attention of American security officials. It is believed to be the headquarters of the Army's secretive unit 61398, where, according to intelligence released by the Mandiant security firm, English-speaking security experts are being employed to steal secrets from U.S. businesses and hack into government sites. According to some analysts, China is conducting espionage against America, targeting a large section of Western organizations. One of the targets of greatest concern is American infrastructure, including water treatment plants, transportation control centers, pipelines, and power grids. And former U.S. official Richard Clark says the only reason you would want to get into the control system for the power grid is to cause damage, destruction, and disruption. Among the targets, the corporate targets of Chinese hackers, according to American officials, is Lockheed and Martin, America's largest defense contractor and the producer of the F-35 jet fighter. American officials believe it is no coincidence that the Chinese version has some very obvious similarities. According to Clark, the espionage is costing Americans hundreds of billions of dollars and thousands of U.S. jobs every year. The White House has confirmed the severity of the espionage, but has been quiet concerning the details. Beijing, however, denies having a part in any wrongdoing, saying the Chinese military has never supported any form of hacking activity. Ironically, the U.S. is believed to be conducting its own cyber attacks on Iran and its nuclear program, but officials say that is different from the economic espionage being conducted by China. From the dangerous effects of being watched to the dangers of what we watch, 2 studies were released recently which suggest that what children view on television may have an impact on their behavior. Reporters say it is not just what they're watching, but also how long they sit in front of the television. The Walsh family, offered as an example, has 6 children, and a television in every car and in every room of their home. Carrie and John Wall say they have rules which restrict viewing, but with 6 children, it is difficult to keep them entertained. According to 2 new studies in the Journal of Pediatrics, however, television could affect children's behavior. New Zealand researchers studied approximately 1,000 children and found that the more television children watched, the more antisocial and aggressive they became. Dr. Susan Cassetta, and contributing insight on the subject, says it means more depression, more anxiety, and keeping to oneself. Pediatricians are concerned not just with the amount of time children are spending in front of the television, but also with the kinds of programs children are consuming. In the second study, American researchers found that preschool-aged children can imitate what they see on TV. And Dr. Cassetta says that a lot of children's programming, even though it's children's programming, still contains a lot of violence. The American Academy of Pediatrics suggests that children older than 2 should watch less than 2 hours of television per day, and that children younger than 2 should not watch any television at all.
Now, Larry, what's been the response from the Obama administration on tonight's story? And secondly, if not television, what options do parents have to occupy their children's time?
Well, as stated earlier, Jeff, the White House is officially acknowledging the severity of the espionage, but hasn't thus far went into any details. They are, however, asking government agencies to help spot and deter hackers. For parents, what we found is that many parents are striving to encourage their children to read as a source of enjoyment and entertainment, but not just any material. There seems to be a trend towards character education. Our team did some research, and from what we were able to find, the most respected and recommended character education program out there is the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. They have an early learning series, an intermediate series for teenagers and both younger and older adults, and they've recently added a parenting manual, which is reported to have an abundance of helpful tips as well. They can be reached at www.peacefulsolution.org.
We appreciate your report, Larry.
Now, if the Syrian uprising was supposed to make things better for the Syrian people, it has only made it worse. 3 massive bombs tore through Damascus this week, the largest detonated outside the headquarters of Assad's ruling political party, where at least 53 were found dead. The other 2 bombs exploded outside the office of Assad's intelligence agency, killing another 22.
The Syrian rebellion began nearly 2 years ago with an uprising against the 42-year rulership of the Assad family. Now, since this fighting began, neighborhoods have been turned into piles of rubble, and 70,000 people have been killed. Now, those who have escaped death are pouring over the borders.
I can only imagine. The opposition has released a statement condemning today's bombing and saying that the Assad regime was to blame for this attack. But, of course, the Assad government was saying that it was extremist elements within the opposition who were responsible. Opposition leaders were meeting in Cairo this week to determine the conditions for possible talks between the Syrian opposition and the Assad government. Those possible talks would likely be brokered by the U.S. and also by Russia.
Now, hundreds of so-called illegal immigrants who were waiting for deportation were instead released this week because the Obama administration says it can't afford to hold them. This move was part of the sequester, or automatic budget cuts and spending, that began this past Friday. Now, keep in mind, these cuts were never intended to happen. They were designed by both parties to be so harmful that they would actually force the president and Congress to compromise on a better way, but they still haven't been able to agree on anything.
Amazing. Now, prior to the immigration's releasing of these immigrants, the Republican Speaker of the House, John Boehner, expressed his disappointment with this deadline approaching. He said, "The House has done its work. It's time for the President and Senate Democrats to do their work." They've known for 16 months that this day was coming. That's why the House acted twice last year. But yet, Senate Democrats and the president never passed anything. It's time for them to do their work, he said.
Homeland Secretary Janet Napolitano suggested yesterday that drastic action might be necessary. She said, "All I can say is we are doing our very best to minimize the effects of the sequester, but there's only so much I can do. I'm supposed to have 34,000 detention beds for immigration. How do I pay for those?" she said. Now, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement declined to comment on specifics of the release, but at least 12 states have released detainees.
Once again, the Republican Speaker of the House, John Boehner, expressed his disappointment and frustration in an interview with CBS News by saying, "This is very hard for me to believe, that they can't find cuts elsewhere in their agency. I frankly think this is outrageous. I'm looking for more facts, but I can't believe that they can't find the kind of savings they need out of that department short of letting criminals go free." And of course, Jeff, the statement on this was that they were letting non-violent offenders out. So
That's
not
right.
people who were dangerous to society.
Now, Speaker Boehner went on to say, "I think that the administration is trying to play games with the American people, to scare the American people. This is not leadership," he said. "They're out there making a lot of noise. What they really ought to be doing is coming up to the Hill and working with the Senate Democrats to pass a bill that can replace the sequester and begin to deal with our long-term spending problem."
Again, sequester is the term that Washington uses for those automatic budget cuts. Speaker Boehner says the House will not act until Democrats in the Senate take the lead on writing a bill that achieves savings in a more sensible way. He was extremely blunt about it this week when he said, "We have moved a bill in the House twice. We should not have to move a third bill before Senate gets off their asses and begins to do something."
Now, when he was asked about that statement, he said, "Yeah, it's time for them to do their work. Our members want us to have cuts from reforms that put us on the path to balance the budget over the next 10 years. That's what we want, and that's a tall order. It's going to mean real work on the entitlement programs, real work on other spending items in the budget." Now, he continued, he said, "The president got his tax hikes in January. The federal government will have more revenue this year than any year in our history. It's time to tackle spending, period," he said.
The automatic spending cuts that began this past Friday come to $85 billion this year. President Obama commented on these cuts at an appearance at the Newport News shipyard. He said, "When you're cutting $85 billion in 7 months, there's no smart way to do that. You don't want to have to choose between, let's see, do I close funding for this disabled kid or the poor kid? Do I close this Navy shipyard or another one," he said.
Now, keep in mind, Katan, that these across-the-board cuts could actually be reversed at any time as long as the president and Congress can agree on something. But the key word is if they can agree.
Seems like they've had a hard time doing this. Now, in Plainview, Texas, which is home to 22,000 people, 2,000 of whom lost their jobs when the Cargill beef processing plant closed last month. The closing is blamed on low herds and the drought. The drought forced many cattle ranchers to slaughter cattle herds they couldn't afford to keep. Now, there's not enough cattle around for the beef processing plant to keep running. And of course, the closing is affecting local businesses such as a printing shop that has been in business for over 100 years.
Now, half their printing orders came from the Cargill plant. One local banker estimates the loss to the economy at $80 million a year. Cargill plant operators could reopen the plant if the herds begin to grow, but that, of course, could take years and far too long for any of the local residents to wait around.
Sure, that's right. Leaving a lot of unfinished business behind, we take it over to Rome now, where the statement is that cleaning up the papacy of Pope Benedict could take years. He leaves people still demanding justice for people abused by the clergy. Now, the church's damage control challenge is to provide believable assurances that the era of abuse is over, despite the unresolved abuse cases still lingering. New York Cardinal Timothy Dolan admits that the church leaders have given people reasons not to have belief or trust in the church anymore.
Well, Benedict was seen as a respected thinker by some, a teacher, and was more concerned with spiritual matters, not the acknowledged mess of the administration or the church finances were not a priority either. Now, the next step since Pope Benedict has stepped down is for the cardinals to have a conclave and elect a new pope. Now, in one of Pope Benedict's last public speeches, he expressed that during the last 8 years, he felt the Lord's presence every day. Although some days were filled with difficult moments, he said, moments when the water was stormy and the wind seemed to be against us, as the history of the church has been. And lastly, he said, and it seemed like at times the Lord seemed to be sleeping.
Interesting. Well, let the sleeping gods lie and contact the House of Yahweh, which is also known as the House of Prayer, where you can learn all the solutions to mankind's problem as taught by Yisrael Hawkins. But of course, don't take our word for it. Find out for yourself.
And if you haven't already done so, please request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. You can contact the House of Yahweh by writing them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. Or you can call them at 1-800-613-9494. You can visit their website at www.yahweh.com or www.yisraelhawkins.com, or you can email them at info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen.
Up next, Yisrael Hawkins. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for joining us.